Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, July 24th. Thanks so much for joining me on this new time. This is going to be the time moving forward, noon Eastern. Makes a little more sense. We just try to keep fitting things better for our family and how things work, and this is a better time, I think. For us, we had some polls in the past, and we almost moved it to noon. It was very close. Last time we asked around and we made it 4 p.m. Eastern or whatever it was last time. But we decided to move it up to noon Eastern. Your lunch day, Friday, getaway day. You can join us critiquing some poems. But we might have a shorter crew on hand, given that we changed the time at the last minute. Let's see, we have Nancy Sabanek here. PMB's got 2 Tonka in the queue. We'll talk about Tonka a little bit. That'll be fun. Rose Leonard is here. Mary Lisa D. Joanna Pendleton's here. Good to see y'all. Clayton Clark, good to see you too. Katie in the next room over. Got Jamie Thomas here. If you have any poems in the queue, if you're watching live, let me know. We'll start with PMB, Paul Mitchell Bernstein, of course. We'll see Darcy. I think we just did Darcy not too long ago, right? So I think maybe we'll do something else. Darcy, if I'm wrong, let me know. But I think we did a poem of yours recently, so we should probably wait a little bit for that. Yeah, for the UK, definitely. The Critique of the Week works much better at this time in Europe and places like that. Mary Keating is here. All right, well, anyway, we're going to do a Critique of the Week like we always do. Looking forward to exploring some poems, talking about what works, what doesn't, how to follow along, how to make it make sense, how to make the most of the story that you're telling, the ideas you're exploring. That's what we do on the Critique of the Week. We can talk about small minutiae, line breaks and things like that, diction. We can talk about the big picture as well. Giving that experience that's so valuable where you get to sit around and hear what people have to say about your poems and how they respond to them. Yeah. All right, so let's take a look. So Paul Mitchell Bernstein has poems first, and we'll see if anybody else steps forward. Let's see. But I'm looking forward to seeing these. Yep, Paul's got 2 Tonka for us he'd like us to look at. Now, if you'd like to submit poems for Critique of the Week, I remind everybody, go to rattle.com. Up under Content, you will see the Critique of the Week page. There will be the portal to submit, and you can submit 2 poems, and we'll talk about them. Okay. And then Paul says about his submission here. Even though it's not strict American Tonka, does it capture the spirit of Tonka? Do the turns work as they should in Tonka? It's the first series, 31 syllables each, better, or the second series, 1 breath, 2 poems? Okay, well, let's take a look. And, to be honest, Tonka is not a form that I know as much about as haiku. There's that poet, we had her on with, they did a book with Deborah Kaloji. She was at our reading series. What is her name? The Japanese poet. I got to look this up because it's very important. Well, let's see. It was rattle.com/publications. Let me look this up. It was in our issue 47. Kitakubo. Where is it? Mariko Kitakubo. Just a wonderful Tonka poet. And Marika, from Japan, and her mission and sort of in life, and she came to our reading series in Los Angeles and was on the Rattlecast with Debbie Kalaji at some point, I believe. Her mission is to make Tonka as popular as haiku, because basically, Tonka uses some of the tools of haiku, or a lot of the tools of haiku, the kind of the sense of cutting and movement like that, and really tight condension, and of course it uses the Japanese meter, which is not based on stress or syllables like they are in English or other languages, French and Arabic and things like that, but on mora, which is time and not the length, so not the syllable count or the number of stresses like we do in English. It's timed with a unit of duration and not a unit of sound. But they still are 5-7-5-7-7 in that mora, though, not in syllables necessarily. And they're more mora per syllable than 1, and so it ends up being shorter than a poem if you count syllables. Let's take a look, though, at this sequence first, just to get the idea of Tonka. I thought it'd be fun to pull it up. This is Mariko Kitakubo, After Fukushima, a Tonka sequence from Rattle number 47. We've published a few tanka sequences as well from her, but this is the one that I knew for sure was a tanka sequence. So let's take a look at this here. Here we go. Mariko Kitakubo after Fukushima, a tanka sequence. When will my later years start? A mother cat has babies at the ruined village. So you can see this, and when we talked on the Rattlecast to Richard Gilbert, his sort of definition of how you should think of structuring a haiku was short, long, short. Like, don't worry about counting syllables, worrying about sort of having that rhythm, because really in the Japanese, like I said, it's a time language. There's sort of this natural, in English, we have a natural iambic rhythm in 5 iambs is really common. Which is why we have iambic pentameter as sort of the dominant meter. In Japan, they use this duration-based measure for time, just the way it's spoken. There's a certain rhythm, and that certain rhythm naturally breaks down into 7 mora. And so you have the haiku, which is like 5 mora, 7 mora, 5 mora, and then there's a sort of sense of silence around each because there's sort of this like silent measure at either end. That's why you have the 5. And so you can see that here with tanka, and we have where tanka though, it's short, here, short, long, long, and that's sort of the structure that tanka is traditionally in Japan. And then tanka end up being a little longer and introduce some more narrative element than haiku. And of course, in Japan, haiku is very tied to season. There's that whole kigo, that aspect of the tradition. And then there's senru, which is similar, but having to do with human nature and not nature itself. And then tanka take those sort of the rules of haiku as far as literary structure goes, and add 2 more long lines and add the ability to include some narrative in it. So you're still sort of condensing, but you're adding a little to it. And you're still having this kind of cutting action with that condension. So you're having a kind of leap within there at some point. But it gives you a little more room to breathe and stretch out and tell a little bit of a story. And that's basically how tanka work. So when will my later years start? A mother cat has babies at the ruined village. 2. Dim light of cherry blossoms, unstoppable petal storm in the ruins beyond my 5 senses. 3. Sounds of the stream in my homeland, strontium is soaking into the placenta. 4. Cherry Avenue, my late mother's favorite, is there another world, petal drift. And 5. There were days when I had my dream. Are you there now, Betelgeuse? And so that's translated from the Japanese by the author and Cathabella Wilson. And we also have this great recording of this. And maybe I should have played that instead of read it. Go find it, because it includes an old flute by Rick Wilson as well. So I'll play a snippet, and then you can search this out and find this this poem here.
この道原子炉内に
We'll cut out there. You see it's 8 minutes long. You can go find this poem. Just look up, rattle.com Fukushima, or you can search under search by the name Mariko Kitakubo, and you will find this poem with that performance as well. But that's an idea of what tanka are doing, just sort of a quick overview. And like I said, Mariko is one of the people who's trying to, her mission, and she really is working hard at it and has been for a long time, is to popularize tanka as well. Because she thinks, in Japan, tanka is, rivals haiku as far as how much it is a part of the literary tradition and things that are published. And she sort of feels like haiku takes the front seat so much, and tanka should more. So check that out, because there are limitations to haiku. The length it has that, like I say, it's two worlds in one breath for a haiku, where you're condensing it into that sort of one utterance. Two sort of things that are shifting and juxtaposing against each other. And this allows you to spread out a little bit and get a little bit more story, which we have. And if you look back at this, I love like the sounds of the stream in my homeland. Strontium is soaking into the placenta. The contrast. So you still have the contrast here and the big cut, but it gives you a lot more room to stretch out these images, and a whole sort of story takes place. Whereas haiku is more like instantaneous, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's take a look at Paul Mitchell-Bernstein's now. And Paul did say that these are sort of, not completely in that form, but inspired by the tanka form. So let's take a look at this. Here. 1. A woman rowed a small white boat, tired and far away from the shore, while a man smiled and held flowers. That's how love is, I suppose. She's an old boat, but sturdy, seaworthy, with a strong water line, and some paint peeling from the hull. That's what love is, I suppose. When their journey began, wide shafts of light shone at an angle perfect for getting in their eyes. That's how love is, I suppose. On the beach, children played, ran, and dug holes, while their parents, tired of the grind, closed their eyes and recoup. That's where love goes, I suppose. Where the water begins, it's warm at a gentle, shallow slope, but soon falls off and goes deep. That's how love is, I suppose. So that's the first of 2 tanka sequences, or tanka series, as a PMB puts it. Ashley Newton-Angle says, is there a Poetry Space episode for tanka? And I don't think there is, actually. That's a good suggestion for doing a show once. And like I said, it's not a form that I know as well as haiku. And so I'd like to learn a little bit more about haiku too. About tanka as well. It's sort of, I sort of gave you all I know about tanka, basically, in that little bit. But part of the Poetry Space, the fun of that is learning more. And I think that's a good episode we should do. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, so Clayton Clark says, love the movement and atmosphere. Marie Keating says, I don't think the refrain adds to the poem. Yeah, I think the refrain, I think it kind of... I'm not sure the form that it's going for is right for the poem. I like the idea of the refrain. I like the way it keeps coming back to that line. It reminds me of another poem. If you want to look at a sample, what is Glenn Moritzini? Because it wasn't Ars Poetic Harmonica, it was Sonny's song. So I'm just pulling up a lot of poems today for some reason, but it kind of reminds me of Sonny's song, which is a Rattle Poetry Prize finalist back in the day. And he's got this refrain, slow guitar, soft trumpet, and a bell that sort of rings throughout like a sort of horizon note along in the poem. I think that's a good example of sort of what Paul's trying to do here in this poem. So you can check this one out as an example, how that soft guitar, slow trumpet, and a bell refrains through the poem. And I think there's the same effect in this one as that with the I suppose. My first thought about I'm not sure if tanka is the right form for this. It feels a little bit sort of wordy and not condensed in the way that tanka functions. And I wonder if you have a refrain, it's really nice to have some kind of rhyme going off the refrain, a guzzle-like thing, Yeah. Yeah. Rosenar says, not sure what makes these tanka or whether that adds to our appreciation. They work as well in free verse, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at. There's sort of a bit of a tanka stanza feel to it. but the condension, you still have a haiku-like condension in tanka. And having two full lines have no image or concrete. If we look back at Mariko's, sounds of a stream in my homeland, strontium is soaking into the placenta. See how tight and concise and image-based still? And we have concrete image kind of in tanka. And in a haiku, we have concrete image, and a lot less function, fewer function words. Like if you function words are all the articles, the ofs, the ands, those things that are actually not generated in your cerebral cortex, but in your Broca's area, lower down in your brainstem, as we learned from what's his name, Pennebaker, in his book The Secret Life of Pronouns, from an episode of Rattle back in the day. But it's so much, the number of sort of weight, content-filled words per word or per line is much higher in haiku and tanka than in sort of more traditional writing. And I think that's missing here in Paul's. So, if you're going to... And I think having and there's nothing wrong with that. But it just strays pretty far from tanka, I would say, just to talk about the subject. I mean, let's take a more look at the poem as a poem. We have these sort of tanka stanzas-ish, and there's 5 of them with that refrain. And the question is the refrain enough to be a refrain? One of the things I wonder if you could pull a rhyme through and rhyme with suppose somewhere. Even if you look at the structure of one of Aaron Murphy's demi-sonnets, where it's a half sonnet, and then you have one rhyme sort of hidden somewhere in there where the last word rhymes somewhere in the poem or in the stanza. I mean, it's a one poem, but this is like a sequence of it, let's say. So what if you had a rhyme buried in here somewhere to sort of connect and make the refrain stand out a little bit more? That's one thought I had just reading it. I kind of like the form and sort of the length of things repeating in the poem worked really well, and I wonder if musically we could tie it together a little more. Anyway, a woman rowed a small white boat, tired and far away from the shore, while a man smiled and held flowers. That's how love is, I suppose. She's an old boat, but sturdy, seaworthy, with strong waterline and some paint peeling from the hull. That's what love is, I suppose. So we get this image of the small white boat, and then that becomes a metaphor for the woman. And that's established pretty well in the poem. Sorry, I'm looking at the comments. Well, we'll keep going. So we've established that pretty well. When their journey began, wide shafts of light shone down at an angle perfect for getting in their eyes. That's how love is, I suppose. And the other thing, too, I keep coming back to this because they're presented as tanka. But in the same way, if you're going to have a tanka sequence, like tankas are self-contained stories. I think one thing, if you're going to, tanka, if you're going to use that form, it compares a lot more to a ghazal than you might think if it's a sequence, because you have that sort of freedom, as Mariko does in the After Fukushima poem that we saw, of having each tanka be a self-contained, really tight, concise story, and then having a sort of swirl of interconnected stories that are not necessarily the same subject, as far as the speaker goes, the perspective goes. You can sort of swirl around and move around a subject with a lot of different camera views. And that's one of the great things about doing a tanka sequence, because you want to have the whole thing self-contained within the tanka, in the same way the couplet of a ghazal has its own story, and you can move between completely different stories that are sort of tangentially related and explore in an essay-like fashion some topic or theme or mood or whatever you're going for. And this is more a linear narrative with a refrain than that. Yeah. Anyway, so we'll get off the tanka line and just talk about this as a poem. When the journey began, wide shafts of light shone down at an angle perfect for getting in their eyes. So this one, I think the first two sections, this was sort of pushing the story forward. It was interesting, introducing the boat, introducing it as sort of a metaphor. This one is a little less clear. And when their journey began, wide shafts of light, like what's causing and why the perfect angle. It's one of those things where there's some things being said, there's an image, but it's not really saying a whole lot about the why or what's actually going on. So this one, it just doesn't push the story forward like the other two, I guess is a way to say what I'm trying to say. On the beach, children played, ran and dug holes while their parents, tired of the grind, closed their eyes and recoup. And they closed their eyes. It should be recouped. There's a verb conjugation problem with that sentence. That's where love goes, I suppose. And so here in this line, the is becomes goes. Where the water begins, it's warm at a gentle, shallow slope, but soon falls off and goes deep. That's how love is, I suppose. And that was the end of the tanka. So, Rosenard says is the third stanza about being dazzled when first in love. And Joanna Penland said maybe a title would help since it's not really a tanka. Yeah, I agree. I think giving us more in the title would sort of set us up more. I feel like the story, like we set up the story, but I don't get to feel, and I think it goes back to what I was saying about the third stanza, where it's saying stuff, but it's not providing a whole lot of content, even though something's happening. And I still don't, by the end, get a sense of who the people are, or why it's important, like why it's singling out. Like there's not enough particularity to make these characters memorable. And I think we should be using these sections to sort of develop, because it's other kids here. We don't know if they have, we don't get a whole lot out of those parts. So I think we can really cram more story into here. Nancy Spanik says there is some assonance and slant rhyme in boat, suppose, shown, suppose, holes, go, suppose, slopes. Yeah, there definitely is. There's some musical quality for sure. Let's see. Yeah. Jane Milton says, I like how visual this poem is, but emotionally I don't feel drawn in. Yeah, I think that's a good summary of what I'm trying to say. And we would get that by feeling more specificity. Emotion always lives in specificity. We go back to when will my later years start? So we have the sense of there's a speaker here. Another thing you get to do in tanka that you don't really in haiku as much or as often. But when will my later years start is a question that sort of has a story swirling around it a little bit. And then we leap to something very concrete. A mother cat has babies at the ruined village. So there's a lot there. There's a lot in juxtaposition, and there's a lot condensed into that storytelling. Dim light of cherry blossoms, unstoppable petal storm in the ruins beyond my five senses. It's just how much is going on there versus how much is going on here. It's just not as much, even though there are more words. I hope that makes sense. So because we're writing in a tight sort of stanza way, we just want more detail, more story, more of what's going on. Tell us more about these people. And that's the way to make us feel. And I think that's why, we get some images and we get a sense of where we are, but we're not really drawn in on an emotional level. Is it syllabic? A woman rowed a small white boat. That sounds 8. Tired and far away from the shore. So that's 8. Well, a man smiled and held flowers. That's 8. That's how love is. That's 4, I suppose. That's 3. So it's 8, 8, 4, 3. She's an old boat, but sturdy. That's 7. Seaworthy with a strong water line. That's 9. And some paint peeling from the hull. That's 8. and then it's got the same refrain. And, I just personally, I'm not a huge fan of syllabics. I know, like A.E. Stallings, and we talked about this with A.E. Stallings when she was on the Poetry Space or in the Rattlecast. And I don't really understand, other than a tool for making you sort of have a constraint that you have to push against and fight against to make surprise come about, which is a great reason to use it. We don't hear syllables in English. We hear stresses. It's a stress time language in the same way, and that's why, in the Japanese traditions that use mora, we don't hear them like they're heard in Japanese. There's a real argument that you can't write haiku or tanka in English because we don't hear it the same way. In syllabic forms, Arabic is syllabic, the Romance languages are syllabic. Syllabic poems, you hear that length and duration and rhythm as a native speaker of those languages. But in English, it's a stress-timed language, and so you hear the rhythm of the stresses and not the rhythm of the syllables. And so it becomes sort of this like artificial constraint to use to write syllabic poems where you don't hear it. You only notice it if you actually like sit down and count, but it's a tool that the writer can use to draw forth surprising things. It's a constraint. It's a net for, talking about what Robert Frost said about free verse being like tennis with no net. It's a net you can put up to give yourself some constraint and make it more of a game, and then good things come out of that. But you don't really hear the syllables in English, so I'm never a huge fan of syllabic poetry myself. The best case, you just don't notice it. And anyway, I mean, that's just my personal opinion about it. Rosenar said, I think you meant total syllable count. Okay. Yeah. And so I guess that would make sense because 8, 8, 8, there's 24 plus that's how love is 28. So 30. And then this had one extra here. And then, so that would be the same. Yeah. So it's an artificial constraint. That's great. As long as you're writing toward newness and surprise and not padding, and so, as Mary Keating says, there are a lot of extra words in his poem. For example, the second stanza could just be an old but sturdy boat with a strong waterline, hull peeling. Yeah, so if you end up using, a syllable count or a meter to pad to make it fit the form, that's not a really useful use of counting syllables. But if you're using it to make yourself have to go into surprising places that you didn't expect, then then that would work. And that's why I think another thing, talking about syllabic poetry with A.E. Stallings, that she suggests that if you write in syllabic poetry to try make sure they're odd number of syllables per line, because that keeps you from getting into other metrical sort of regularity. Luke Arnis says, I don't notice the syllables personally. I don't think we do. I think we even at some point asked A.E. Stallings about that, if she could hear it. And I think she said not really, if I remember right. I hope I'm not putting words in her mouth. But even, one of the best syllabic poets of the day, it's not a thing it's not part of the English language. We hear stresses and chunks of sound around those stresses, and we sort of speed up around them. And, we don't have an ear for that. That's not how the language works. And so anytime you add a French form or an Italian form like the sonnet, you can, we make it stress timed with a sonnet by making it pentameter. We can do that. But if you're doing it strictly syllable count based, it's just something you don't hear that you're putting into it. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just, you have to use it for what it is, which is a tool to generate more poetry. But anyway, in general, my point is here: we gotta, if you're gonna use a syllable count, that's great. But we really need more concrete detail, more specificity. We need to develop who these people are. She's old. She's an old boat, but sturdy, seaworthy, with a strong waterline. And the next stanza, show some more of her, tell some of their background story, or we just want more details about this couple so we can really connect to it and feel the emotional weight of it. Okay, let's take a look at the other one. This is the second tanka-ish poem. Rock cliffs high, air a mesquite, green and purple sky. From under a tree I see and breath. A pile of boulders, digging tools, two shirtless boys, brought to a desert, brought to work. On a 2-lane highway, a speed post reads 75, going west to the coast. To the coast, over an Inkopog grade, skies were cloudless, ribbons of stars the only light. So this feels much more like an actual tanka sequence. And I would call this a tanka sequence. And even if it wasn't labeled that, I would be thinking that's what it is, because that's how it feels. And notice how there's sort of their own stories here. I think that it works much better, both because there's, it doesn't really matter that it fits the form we're calling it so much as that the poem has content that's interesting, and it feels like it's interesting being used that way. Yeah. Did he mean breathe? Yeah. So it's interesting to compare the two, because I think this actually is a tanka sequence and the other one really isn't. It's more just a free verse poem with a refrain and 5-line stanzas. So let's look at more, and I do think that should be breathe at the end. I think it was just a typo. Rock cliffs high, air mesquite, green and purple sky. From under a tree I see and breathe. Well, that's painting the scene very well. I wonder. So first of all, I would go a dash instead of a comma, just to set it off a little more. The comma is sort of the smallest speed bump in a poem, and it feels more dashy. And it would fit tanka and the Japanese forms a little more if it had a dash too. Rock cliffs high is interesting. Air mesquite works. Green and purple sky. From under a tree I see and breathe. It's interesting. It sets it up. A pile of boulders, digging tools, two shirtless boys, brought to a desert, brought to work. I think for this one, a pile of boulders, digging tools, two shirtless boys. That's all really interesting, nicely condensed detail. That's what I was asking for in the first poem. The brought to a desert, brought to work. I want more of the story told in these two, because I don't really understand like who brought them, I guess, is the question being begged. And there's a repetitive nature, to it, without revealing enough of what, I don't know. And we get what they're brought to do later here. But I think I think it's best to think of these as working best, being self-contained. And so I would like to see that here, and it provides another opportunity to include more detail in this one section. So where could you leap to? From a pile of boulders, digging tools, two shirtless boys, brought to a desert, sip from their canteen, or something like that, where it pushes the story a little more and adds more detail into it, instead of being repetitive in a way that's mostly repeating itself. Now, the next one, we get more of where we realize sort of what the actual overarching scene is. On a 2-lane highway, a speed post reads 75, going west to the coast. And again, I would put a dash here. You do want to have cuts in tanka too. You want to have leaps, and we can look back. I don't think we should or need to, but we can look back at the Fukushima poem and see how there were like real leaps in perspective in the same way you would in a haiku. And what's nice, I think this is my favorite one, because there's the still scene on a 2-lane highway. A speed post reads 75. It's just sitting there. That sign doesn't move, but then we are going west to the coast. And there's a sense of different perspective in the way that those two worlds sort of collide. The one flying by at 75 and the speed post that's just always there. And there's a really nice contrast to that, especially, I think it should be set off with a hyphen, like I said, or not M dash, I mean. But you see, that's a real good example of what you want to be doing in the tanka or anything in this sort of style of short form poem, is that you want to have things cutting against each other. Like that kind of contrast, because it's that cut, that's juxtaposition, that pulls out surprise and new meaning and new ways of looking at the world. And so I think this is the best tanka of the group, probably. Let me say, to the coast, over in Incopa grade, skies were cloudless, ribbons of stars, the only light. So I love ribbons of stars, the only light. Skies were cloudless. I think weakens that couplet a little bit. What is Incopa grade? I'm not sure what that is. Incopa. Oh, that's a mountain. Yeah, okay. So the grade, the slope of the mountain, it's a rugged mountain range in Southern California. I would prefer calling them mountains, to the coast over Incopa Mountains. I think that the grade, it's sort of a strange way to put it. And it sort of leads to a little bit of confusion for me, whereas if we knew what that was, we wouldn't have that problem. And I love the ribbon of stars, the only light. And that leaves us some room if we cut this and change this to add a little bit more detail that's sort of surprising and cuts against instead of combines with the ribbons of stars here. Even if it was like over to the coast over Incopa grade, what's a high? What would the grade be? Like 4% or something? But if it was like to the coast over Incopa grade 4%, ribbons of stars, the only light. To see how that like cuts more, how the ribbons and the grade and the road. I guess what you want is the road to feel like ribbons, but you don't think about it until you think of the stars as ribbons, and that can be where the contrast and sort of cut and the mirror-ism kind of is going on. So finding something here that would sort of tie these together in a way. A lot of times in like a monoku, there'll be one word that's like a hinge, like that sort of used both ways. And it feels like this tanka could use a line kind of like that, where it reads in sort of both ways to make it really work, I think, and highlight that contrast. So that would be my suggestion for this one. Anyway. Deb T says, or pass instead of grade. Yeah, that would make more sense. Over Incopa, pass. Yeah, that's a better word. Okay. Mary Keating says you don't need reads after speed post, looking back up to this one. And yeah, that's a good point. On a 2-lane highway, a speed post 75. That does work. But it makes the sentence a little more clunky too to say it like that. So, but just having the image is the important part. See any other comments before we move on? It was Luke. Luke, I know you said you had poems in the queue. Let me know your last name so I make sure I pull up the right one. Is it Arntz? But I will try to find it. Anyway, there's 2 from PMB. Let's take a look at see if we can find Luke's poems in here. And thanks for sharing those. It was fun talking about tanka, and we should, I think, have a poetry space or something like that about tanka, or I think Mariko. I'm not sure. With the translation difficulty, I think it'd be difficult to have Mariko on the show on the Rattlecast. But we should do something with that. Anyway, let's take a look see what Luke has. Okay, yeah, it is Luke Art. So updated drafts Luke's got here. We'll look at those. Luke from Indianapolis, Indiana. Any feedback would be lovely, Luke says. So let's take a look at these. So Luke just submitted them yesterday. Quick on the draw. Okay. Here's his poem. Ready? Jock itch on my balls. Jock itch on my balls. I scratch them on the couch, in the elevator at work, on the pot. Smells like sourdough starter. Jock itch in my ass, and I can't find the cream at CVS. I get the foot cream with the same active ingredients and crab walk to check out with my sweaty ass and balls itching. Get home and check the mirror. Looks like mange. I rub the foot cream on my balls and asshole and resist the urge to scratch until I pass out in bed. Wake up itching my flaky nuts in the night. Oh, that's nice. Nails finally shredding the papery skin I was born to itch. My wife smacks me and tells me to stop. I keep scratching, scritch, until they're wet and tacky, then burning and itchy. Huh, that's worse. So, so this is sort of a startlingly gross poem, but humorous in its sort of honesty, and the directness of it, and one of the things that you don't talk about much, so it makes for an interesting subject matter. Let's see. Mary Keating says, "So funny." Okay, so first off, I would definitely not repeat the title. Just cut that. If that's going to be the title, don't repeat it because that just weakens it. It's just general advice. You never want to repeat stuff unnecessarily, unless if it's a refrain and it's building and changing its meaning over time, and you're adding to it and changing the way you think about it, and it's pulling you back. But if it's just repeating the title in the first line or the last line is the title or something like that, you don't want to repeat it because that takes away our appreciation for the line, and it makes it have less of an emotional impact because we've heard it before. So cut that. I scratched them on the couch, in the elevator at work, on the pot. Smells like sourdough starter. So we get senses, we get, we know exactly what the poem is about. Let's see. Yeah, Rosenar says, well done for going where most wouldn't, but the N, does it go anywhere apart from your nether regions? Yeah, Debchi says, well described, thought I was waiting for a turn. Yeah. And that's the thing for me. It's, yeah. And now for something completely different, Jared says. Yeah, and Mary King says, I really feel the itch. Jamie Millen says, just saying I don't want the starter. The humor works. Yeah. I don't know if is the starter, I don't know if this is what Jenny meant, but is a starter necessary? Smells like sourdough is fine and cuts it more concisely. Jock itch in my ass. I can't find this cream at CVS. I get the foot cream. I don't know if, again, I'd probably cut this too, because every time you repeat it, it becomes less powerful. I can't find the cream at CVS. I get the foot cream with the same active ingredients and crab walk to the checkout with my sweaty ass and balls itching. And I think, we already had the ass. We already had the sweaty and the balls. I'd probably just say check out itching. Like I'd cut a little bit pare that back. Nancy Tunnell says if it's intended to be a funny poem, rhyme and meter or rhyme might make it better, and that is true. And I think as a light verse poem, that's always it hits more the humor if you have some rhyme and meter going on. Dry Mantia says I think it should be starter. That's the live yeast. Yeah, I guess that's true. I was trying to think of like how much different it smells. And yeah, you're probably right. That is something I should know because Katie makes sourdough bread a lot and has a starter. You'll hear the story about that coming up in the fall issue of Rattle. Anyway, get home, check the mirror. Looks like mange. I don't know what mange looks like is the problem with that, or at least how that, when I think of mange, I think of, for me, coyotes, because there are a lot of coyotes with mange out in the American West. And, I think of like fur falling off. Does it really look like that? I don't know. It didn't, that line didn't strike me as true, but I could be wrong. I rub the foot cream on my balls and asshole and resist the urge to scratch until I pass out in the bed. And again, I think the repeating, it just loses its sort of punch and the sort of shock value of it every time. And so I would skip that stuff. It feels like it's trying too hard to be offensive or something. But the rest is compelling. I wake up itching, flaky nuts in the night. That's funny. Ooh, God, that's nice. I'm not sure about the ooh, God, that's nice, because it sort of breaks the voice of it. We don't have anything else like that in the poem. But like it's storytelling. You see how it's telling us, my wife smacks me and tells me to stop. This is you telling me a story about what happened in the present tense. But then saying that out loud sort of pulls us out of that narrative mode. Nails finally shredding the papery skin I was born to itch. My wife smacks me and tells me to stop. I keep scratching, scritch until they're wet and tacky, then burning and itchy. Huh, that's worse. Yeah, and so this pulls back the we get to the oh God, that's nice, and then the huh, that's worse. And I think it was Deb T and Rose both talking about there not being a sense of movement, but in storytelling, I think there is. I think I disagree. It's just sort of, I think the poem knew where it was going to go and didn't develop that turn as much. But what it is the relief from scratching actually is worse because it turns into burning, and it's sort of a that's the sort of the revelation in the poem. I do think that this kind of poem, I think the best comment was the person who said, I can't remember who it was, that it would work the best in a kind of form, and with some rhyme and some meter, and a kind of poem, sent to light verse, and I think that works. PMB says limerick. Yes, it'd be more fun on limerick. Yeah, like condensing it down to that. Yeah. Ashley Newton says maybe describe the relief more. Yeah, I think the problem is we get so much of description of the sort of shock value of the itchiness and the condition, and then I think we need more description of the relief, and then more of a description of the relief, what it turns into, which is a worse burning feeling instead of relief. If we wanted to make it sort of, I think right now the poem could be condensed into a short, funny poem, like a limerick is a great example, or it could be stretched a little bit till we get to actually experience we actually experience the whole pathway a little more. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's my thoughts. Anybody else have any other thoughts on this one? And of course, there's a Bukowski-esque blunt honesty to this. So the poet to look at for advice on how to treat a subject like this would be Chuck. Mary Keating says the poet could create a tension of how he isn't supposed to scratch his balls and how he finally gives in with a third to last stanza as an end. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, is that if we add more arc, then we can get more detail and it becomes, but the other option is to condense it too. Ashley says, thank you for writing about a unique topic. Yeah. And if you want to, I don't know. I mean, there's ways that this can become a metaphor for other things too. Think of, if you want to make it a more serious poem, despite, surprising in that it's serious with the shocking nature of how honest and raw, no pun intended, it is. You can go deeper places as extended metaphor. What is the poem called? Oh, there's one poem we published. It was probably the most offensive poem to people that we ever did. And I think it worked, even though it was sort of gross like this, because it felt like an extended metaphor for the writing process. And I thought that was hilarious, but most people hated it. What was that poem called? It was an issue. I'm hesitant to read this one again. It's one of the ones I wondered if I should have not published it, but that happens sometimes. But I thought it was funny in how sort of depraved it was, but also as an extended metaphor for the writing process if you read it that way. And why not? Let's try to find it. It was issue 40, I think, or 40. Man, because I can't remember the title. 42, 44. Sorry, I'm trying to find this. It was in that issue. Oh yeah. Oh, I gotta fix this page too. Okay, well, I'm completely talking to myself at this point. Yeah. So this is probably the most yeah. I'll just read it. Why not? This is T.L. Burns, Fucking the Gap. I heard about this bloke who used to put his dick in a sandwich bag and squirt a load of Vaseline in. Then he'd mush it all around his dick before proceeding to get down on his knees, after which he'd lift up the mattress, stick his dick in a bag, and then fuck the gap between it in the bed. I'm not sure if he was crazy or a genius. The gap between the two is slim, about the same width of the gap he fucked, I guess. So that is Fucking the Gap. And the interesting thing to me is both it's sort of shocking in what it talks about, and yet it's something, that apparently people do, and something that no one's probably ever written about or probably will again. But yet it also works as an extended metaphor for a bunch of different things when you really think about it. And I think that made it sort of an interesting poem in addition to it being sort of shocking and weird. So anyway, that is that poem. Yeah, Rosnar says that is actually a good poem. Yeah, it was very divisive. Like, some people loved it and loved that we published it, and some people canceled their subscriptions. But that's the nature of trying to be eclectic and surprising, I guess. People get rattled, as they say. Okay, well, let's look at the other poem from, again, we were looking at poems by Luke Arntz. And the other one is this, Airport Buddhist. Okay, Airport Buddhist. I lean on a sloped bench meant to keep moving, balance our heavy packs like eggs on the polished stone ground, and think about what steps are left before I can sleep in a real bed. Take taxi to hotel, find a room, prep for bed, sleep. The tones and consonants I can't place echo from my friends' sorting currency deals and quickly melt into the noise of a place built to pass through. I look for them through the crossing flows of roller bags and bodies, and I see her in a small eddy. She carefully pulls a bloated, snagging trash bag free from the can, her hands salving puckers in the plastic. She sees it straining and quickly slides another bag around the trash, knotting it with a clean, even bow before adding it to her cart. A passing man dumps a half-full drink cup into the unbagged can, soaking the inside slick and brown. I wait for her irritation. She removes the cup, sprays the can with cleaner, wipes it dry, and replaces the bag. How long have I been scowling? I like that turn of the question at the end. Yeah. Let's see. So I'm just reading some of the other comments before we... Okay. Airport Buddhist. Yeah, so somebody says already... it's Vaishnavi says, yes, the title is lovely. Yeah, I like the title. Airport Buddhist. I lean on a slope bench meant to keep moving, balance our heavy packs like eggs on the polished stone ground, and think about what steps are left before I can sleep in a real bed. take taxi to hotel, find a room, prep for bed, sleep. I think this, so I really like the first, these lines, set up the scene really well. I think this description of, how many steps, I think it could be a better list of descriptions. We also repeat bed here for no real reason, which, again, like repetition like that weakens, it sort of stands out in your mind in a way that softens everything. But I'd like to see the actual steps laid out in a way that's sort of interesting and sort of a little more detailed, I guess. For example, just to explain what I mean, instead of like prep for bed, like there's a way you can describe the actual steps around the bed, going to the bathroom, brush your teeth, and as you pace or something, like the specificity of that would make this list come to life a little more. Tones and consonants I can't place echo from friends sorting currency deals and quickly melt into the noise of a place built to pass through. I love a place built to pass through. This section feels a little bit like cluttered and hard to follow because we have friends sorting currency deals. So the friends are there suddenly, but then they melt into the other noise, and it's like adding more people to a scene that don't really need to be there. And so it's just sort of cluttered and clunky in this section. I do like the thing of it as a place built to pass through, though. I look for them, though, through the crossing flows of roller bags and bodies, and see her in a small eddy. She carefully pulls a bloated, snagging trash bag free from the can, her hand salving puckers in the plastic. She sees it straining and quickly slides another bag around the trash, nodding with a clean, even bow before adding it to her cart. A passing man dumps a half-drink cup into the unbagged can, soaking the inside slick and brown. I wait for her irritation. She removes the cup, sprays the can with cleaner, wipes it dry, and replaces the bag. How long have I been scowling? I do like this. So, Rose starts solving puckers is great. Rose said that she would cut the last line, and I can definitely see the impulse to do that. And I think in a lot of cases I would say that too. But I think I love the way, and why I like the line, is the way this poem really enacts very well the way you end up like engrossed in a scene, and then you forget about yourself as like a part of that scene, like witnessing it and being there. And so because the question is how long have I been scowling, it like reveals how little I've been paying attention to myself. I mean, not in some like moralistic way or something, but just in the way psychologically we live within a scene. Like it reminds me a little bit of the way I've been thinking about this lately, a lot just in cinematography, the way that there are scenes in certain movies where there's no one else in the scene except for like the main character or whatever, or maybe not even. And then the camera is like hand cammed and moved around like it's a person looking in different places and directions. We were watching, what was it? I guess Battlestar Galactica. We were watching the series for the first time with the kids. It's one of my favorite shows. But I love the way they do space scenes, like those space dogfights kind of that they have, because they do have this like camera pan. Like it makes it feel like there's someone, like you're actually looking around. The other one was the Joker. There's this, it was that one with Joaquin Phoenix. Me and Katie were watching that a few nights ago. And there's one scene where he like climbs into his refrigerator because he's so sad. But then the camera kind of like paces like someone's walking, even though there's no one else in the apartment, into the kitchen. So it has that same kind of element in the poem. And I think it's great to think about poetry in a similar way you do cinematography, because there are these like ways you zoom in and you close up and you pan, or you like show the scope of things. And, so you move in and you move out, you change your perspective. You look from the bottom up at someone, then look from the top down. You have like bird's eye views. You change the direction of the camera angle to focus on whichever subject. There's all these things that you can do. And this is one of those, is a sort of a unique, a neat camera trick within the poem, to move to how long have I been scowling. So I like that a lot, actually, even though it's a kind of like a linguistic way of moving in the poem that I would very often say just cut that and linger on the image. But I like that one extra step where the speaker sort of re-enters the scene. And I think that feels really authentic to human experience. So I really like that line, actually. Let's see. Yeah. And Clayton Clark had already said that much more succinctly. I like the scowling because it turns it on himself. Yeah. Did we drop off? No. Okay. I don't know. Facebook or YouTube acted a little strange, but everything else is streaming fine. Did my internet cut out for a second? Anyway. Well, anyway, I don't know if YouTube's having some problem. Is it just YouTube? I think it's just YouTube. It's probably some YouTube server. I don't know if you're experiencing that, but I have no idea how it's coming across. Let's see. PNB says Leonard Cohen literally uses a camera pan in his song, Last Year's Man. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I think it's just YouTube. Let me check my hang on. Let me see. All right, well, our internet connection is fine. Am I back for everybody yet? Okay. You're lagging, now you're back. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, we'll continue this. Let's see. So, let's go back to the poem. Where were that? Okay, let's look back here. So tones and consonants I can't place. Echo for my friends sorting currency deals. We already talked about that. The quickly melt in the noise of a place built to pass through. I look for them through the crossing flows of roller. I like the crossing flows of roller bags and bodies. But I would sort of, I don't know, we just don't need the sorting currency deals and that much about the friends. Like, it just gets a little wordy and too much here. I like that part. I like that part. And we could be looking for, our companions or traveling friends or whatever through this, and then just see the woman. She carefully pulls a bloated, snagging trash bag free from the can. Her hands solving puckers in the plastic. See, that's very nice. And what I really like to point out the most in Critique of the Week is where poems are working and where the voice has sort of the right voice and density to it. And this is a good example of like where your voice and storytelling is working effectively. And then this would be an example where it's not. It's too wordy and not adding enough detail. So that's a good description. She sees it straining and quickly slides another bag around the trash, nodding it with a clean, even bow before adding it to her cart. And so we admire that. That's I assume that's the airport Buddha right there. A passing man dumps a half-full drink cup into the unbagged can. The line here gets very long, and I wonder why not have a line break like there. Because it makes it stand out. Like, it makes it something that you notice how long it is, and you think for a second, why is this line that long when nothing else is? One of the things you wanted to do when you're using, sort of a casual free verse kind of line is to not let those things play outside. There's somebody who's pulling into our driveway. I think they're people coming to fix our AC. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Anyway, that is the Critique of the Week for this week. It is way past the hour. I think we talked about this poem a good amount, though. So That's it. Now, coming up on the record. Sorry for the choppy ending here, but I'm going to cut out. But that was a critique of the week. Now, coming up on the rattle. Oops. There we go. Coming up on the Rattlecast, this week's guest is going to be Jeffrey. No, it's Jeffrey Bean. Now, Jeffrey has that wonderful poem, Box Bones, in the current issue of Rattle. It's a quatrain guzzle. He's going to talk about that project and the form that he invented for it. He's also going to talk about his most recent book, Everywhere, Everywhere. So Jeffrey Bean, Rattlecast number 352. The prompt for this week was to think of something you didn't expect to open up but did and make it risky. That is the prompt for this week. That is the show for this week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on the Critique of the Week at the new time. And thanks for bearing with me through the choppiness of that weird cutting out. And now I got to cut out soon so I can deal with the maintenance people who are coming over to our house a little early. But thanks for being here. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.